Lead sheets are the most popular form of music notation for jazz and pop music. You see a melody line written in traditional sheet music notation with chord symbols above it. I get a lot of students asking me about how to play lead sheets because, especially if you're coming from classical music, it can be confusing that there's not one simple rule for how to play a lead sheet. Now, in a moment, I'm going to give you some basic rules for how to start playing lead sheets, but I do first want to point out that if you want to just have a formula, you're missing the point of lead sheets. The whole reason to write out music in this way is that we're leaving some things up to the performer. Lead sheets are kind of a sweet spot or a compromise between traditional sheet music and a simple chord chart. We do have the melody notated, but we're leaving the arrangement of the chords up to the performer. What this means is that you can adapt to different musical contexts. I'll be using this jazz standard, I Fall in Love Too Easily, as an example here. Say I were accompanying a vocalist or a horn player. I wouldn't be worried about the melody. I would just be looking for supportive ways to play the harmony here. And it's nice knowing where the melody is because I can choose to complement it or avoid it if I want, but I'm not actually going to be playing the melody. Then there might be times where I'm playing a solo piano arrangement, and I can do that at very different tempos and give it different feelings. I could also use this lead sheet if I were playing this song with a rhythm section, a bass player and drummer, and I might voice everything in a really different way. So you can see that improvisation is kind of the point. But when you're just starting out, that's pretty frustrating because you want something to hold on to, right? You want some sort of approach that you can try so that at least you get to hear the song while you're developing all your vocabulary of how to improvise with chord changes. So let's look at 3 basic approaches you can take for how to create a solo piano arrangement from a lead sheet. And that means we're going to be responsible for at least 3 things here: melody, bass, and some sort of harmonic accompaniment. And we only have 2 hands. So I like to split this up into 3 approaches. We can just give the melody to the right hand, and then bass and chords are going to be covered by the left hand. We can just play bass in the left hand, and then play melody and grab some chord tones with the right hand. Or we can put the melody and the bass in the outsides of our left and right hands, and then use these inner fingers to do kind of a team job on the harmony. So check it out. Here's what approach 1 might sound like. My right hand is reading the melody. My left hand is playing simple 3-note voicings for these chords. And you can always just do this by playing root position chords. If you aren't comfortable finding root position chords from chord symbols, I have a 2-page guide to understand every chord symbol you're likely to see in most lead sheets, and you're welcome to download that for free if you join my newsletter. Those root position chords are going to work great here. You will be jumping around a little bit with your left hand. And especially if you start getting into a lower register, these chords can start to sound a little muddy if you're playing every single note in a root position chord. So one solution to that is stick with the root position chords and just move the melody up an octave. We can also thin out the left-hand chords a little bit by just leaving out the 5th. You don't really need the 5th of the chord as much as you need the other chord tones in order to give the chord its characteristic sound. So this root, 3rd, and 7th shape for a 7th chord is often called a shell voicing. If your hand is big enough, you can alternate between root 3rd, 7th and root 7th, 3rd. My left hand is not big enough to do this, partly because I have a stub thumb in my left hand. Hopefully you can see that. But I have a student who's been able to play these 10ths really easily lately, and it's been really fun seeing him use these alternating voicings for shell voicings to play through songs like this. You're looking for what works for you in terms of shell voicings or root position chords for your left hand. You can do something that you saw me doing in that first arrangement where instead of playing the root all the time in your bottom note, you can sometimes play the fifth instead of the root so that you have nicer voice leading. And I'll often do that, especially in like a 2-5-1 circle of fifths movement with the harmony. It often works really well to leave the root of one chord in place, and it becomes the fifth of the next chord. So that's approach number one. Our left hand is just completely in charge of the harmony by itself. Let's look at an approach where your left hand only has to worry about the bass, and your right hand is grabbing some extra chord tones under the melody. The chord tones I'm choosing in this approach are very practical. I'm basically just starting with the melody and then seeing what can I reach from this chord underneath the melody. And sometimes you can play those chord tones together with a strong beat in the melody. Or sometimes you can separate them out. But this is one of those situations where the musicality is determined by the physicality. We're really limited by what we can reach in the lower fingers of our right hand. If you're just using the lower fingers of your right hand underneath the melody to cover these chord tones. So you're just going to want to look for whatever chord tones from the present chord are available to you in the lower fingers of your right hand. And you saw how sometimes I was just kind of needing to get out of the way after playing a chord tone to make room for the melody. Right here, for example, I played that A flat, which is the seventh of the B flat dominant 7 chord, but then immediately I had to let go of it and play it again a little more loudly for the melody. So I'd say I use this approach actually a little less often than the other two, but it's a good one to practice, and it's definitely useful if you want to give your left hand a little more to do as a bass player. Like say I were doing this as kind of like a medium swing, my left hand might want to be moving around a little more. And I'm giving my left hand the freedom to do that by grabbing these chord tones in my right hand. In our last approach, our hands are going to share that chord playing role. And I think this opens the door to a much more interesting world of harmony. The first place to start with it, though, is just to focus on covering melody, bass, and then the third and seventh of every chord. But now that we're using both hands, we can spread out a little more. And we can also do really good voice leading with those thirds and sevenths. You notice every time I have a third and a seventh, and I'm moving around the circle of fifths in the root motion of the chords, the seventh resolves down to the third. So this is seventh resolving down to third. Here again is seventh resolving down to third. Taking care of your thirds and sevenths like that with really good voice leading gives you a great foundation for whatever other harmony you might want to add in. So that's it. We have 3 approaches: left-hand harmony, right-hand harmony, shared harmony. And I encourage you to explore these on your own. I think most of the real fine details of how this ends up playing out with different songs are things that you just have to discover through trial and error. I had great teachers give me a lot of these rules, but also a lot of my ideas that I've formed about how I might navigate playing a standard like this alone at the piano. I've arrived at those ideas just through experimentation. And honestly, that's the fun part. So enjoy it, and keep in mind that the whole point of a lead sheet is improvisation. So your job is to play around, try things, and don't be afraid to do things that sound wrong the first time. That's the only way you can learn to do the things that sound right. I'm Ted with Piano Fluency. Thanks for joining me.